Welcome to episode 20 of Radio Omnicor. I'm your host, Colleen McClintock, and you're listening to the show that is guaranteed to teach you something useful and meet an interesting and dynamic guest. In studio today, we welcome Dr. Hilton Rudnick, Omnicor's own MD, and Cullen McKenzie, also known as the White Zulu. Cullen is a polyglot with a background in classics, including Latin and Greek, and a total of 7 years in various classrooms. He was raised bilingually, speaking both English and Zulu, and today speaks a total of 6 languages. He has worked as a translator and interpreter in Zulu for the past 15 years. Cullen is currently finishing his Zulu science fiction novella, ukuThintana. This will be a first for South Africa, and he is also teaching about 25 adults and 5 school-age learners, and including our team, on a weekly basis. In his day job, he works as a researcher for an educational NGO. Welcome, Cullen. It's so wonderful to have you in the studio today. A little bit intimidating to have your Zulu teacher. I'm now having second thoughts. But it's really special to get to spend some time with you, understanding a little bit about your background and how you come to know so many languages, and you're so passionate about what you do. So really thrilled to be able to discuss more about your Zulu and your lessons that you've been doing at Omnicor. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Colleen. It's wonderful to be here. I've really enjoyed the time that I've spent so far with Omnicor, and this is an interesting new step to start on. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Hilton?
Thanks. I'm also happy to be here. I think this is a bit of a different podcast for us, since the topic is different to what we normally cover. We normally cover things around that are related to our offering in some way. I do think this is a critical podcast, though, just in terms of like Cullen's specific position in the South African landscape, because from what I know about you, Cullen, you're a complete outlier. You're a white guy who is fluent in African languages, and in some way, it feels like our country is really needing that to be multiplied by 1,000, where we can all just communicate with each other much more effectively instead of just reverting to English or whatever languages most people revert to. So, I mean, I do kind of see your position in South Africa as very unique, and I'm wondering if the journey that South Africa is going to go on is that we all find some kind of middle ground in the multiverse of languages, rather than kind of just all remain detached from each other in our different language groups.
I mean, I think that's going to unfold during this podcast.
Right.
So maybe we should kick off, Cullen, with you telling us a little bit about your unique your upbringing and how you come to learn Zulu so beautifully and so fluently.
Sure. So there are a number of things in what you were saying, Hilton, which really pinged with me, and I think that there's a hopefulness in following the outliers, the leading edge, the different, in order to find some solution. I think that I come from a family of mavericks, which is an interesting admission to make. My father was raised speaking isiZulu. He spoke and still speaks English with a bit of a stutter. And so I grew up in a household where my father was constantly interacting isiZulu. So for me, it's my father tongue. And my mother grew up here in Gauteng, and she learned isiZulu as an adult when she was about 25, and also Twasad, which is she went through the initiation process as Isangoma.
Wow.
So those two met, now this is almost like I'm making this up, but they met at the centenary celebrations of the Anglo-Zulu War at Ondini. And so the household I grew up in was this interesting hybrid, something different. My family also moved across the Tugela into KwaZulu in 1987, which was precisely when most white people were going the other way or leaving the country. State of emergency, and we moved deeper into KwaZulu. So I think that that was the beginning for me of a hybrid existence, because we would have church services in isiZulu and sometimes in English. My playmates at school were Zulu speakers because I was at a Catholic school, and the Catholic school is the only desegregated school in the whole of Eshowe, which is where I grew up. So I grew up in a different South Africa, actually, from a lot of my peers. And I think that had a profound impact on me. I mean, I remember, just to tell you a story to lead you into it, I was in Cubs, a very colonial institution. And my brother and I were we were only two from the convent school. And the rest of the boys in Cubs were from the local government school, not desegregated, whites only. And we were harassed. We had to fight back. We were called all sorts of horrible names. But basically, that showed me for the first time that there was this other place, this other South Africa that wasn't where I was growing up. But the most important thing for me was that upbringing laid the foundation for two languages to coexist in my thinking. And I thought that was normal. Dad, ukhuluma isiZulu. Mum, ukhuluma isiZulu. Thina sonke sikhuluma isiZulu. But it was when in 1994 my father was elected to Parliament to represent the IFP that we moved to near Pietermaritzburg. And then I saw stark difference, because unlike KwaZulu, where everything was harmonious and there was, to a certain extent, a living together that had been negotiated, in Natal it was a very different thing. The oppression was apparent. You could sort of actually just feel it. And I think that was difficult for me, because suddenly speaking Zulu was not a thing which was normal and a thing which was actually prestigious. That's what you aim to do. Instead, it was a lesser thing. It was a denigrated thing, to use the word which is most apt in this instance, which meant that I tried to take Zulu classes at the school I was at, but the person teaching it was learning it the night before and teaching it during the lesson, which is just terrible. So I gave up on learning it in school there at that point, and instead did Latin, because that was open to me. It was that kind of school. And Afrikaans, and carried those through Afrikaans until grade 9, French from grade 8 to the end of grade 9, and then picked up Zulu eventually at my high school, where for the first time I was able to study it properly with someone teaching me from the perspective that I was coming from, because it was taught by another white Zulu. So there are a few of us. We're not that rare. But how we choose to interact with that otherness, that hybridity, is different. So this man, Mnumzan Brown, he was a cattle farmer. So he had, like my father, he'd become Zulu. The only difference was the color of his skin. And that sort of rekindled some of the love for the language, and it brought me closer to it. And I didn't feel so othered. Because living in Natal, as opposed to living in KwaZulu, those were two different experiences. I started using it and working in it as soon as I could. And by working in it, I mean writing, translating, teaching. So I think it was an imperative for me, like you said earlier, Hilton, that I should actually try and replicate this somehow. I should try and spread this idea, because I see the difference it makes every day.
I mean, I think it would be interesting just to open that up a little bit. And as a white-speaking, fluent isiZulu speaker, what are the what is your experience in South Africa that whites who don't have any black language? I mean, how do you see that difference?
So, wow. I'm going to answer your question with a story. I teach various different groups of people, and one of my clients is a high school student, and when I go to her house to teach her, I'm usually greeted by Umama Wasendlin, the housekeeper, and we have a conversation. Sakulum. And she listens and she laughs and she smiles, and we're having a deep conversation, and I bring in proverbs and I bring in idiom and we're laughing and joking, and then she stops and she says, "Ai, awuya nomlungu, ungumuntu." Okay, which is that's an interesting thing to consider. You're not an umlungu, she says to me. You're umuntu. You're a human. You're a person. It's like, wow. I hadn't considered it like that before. But people tend to throw around words like ubuntu and think that they can get to it through a cognitive pathway. It's not. It's not a code of ethics necessarily. It's actually a way of being.
Right.
And knowing the language enables me to tap into that a little bit better. I mean, that's just one example where, because I was able to have a conversation and laugh and joke and talk about things, I had now switched category, or I'd switched what I was to her. My favorite interactions are the ones where I end up also being called brother, because then that is also, I no longer feel other. I'm not something else. But that does make me look at other white people in South Africa and think, how do you survive? Isn't it terribly frustrating? And I think that the issue for me is that knowing even just a little bit of the language, even just this short amount that you've been exposed to in these lessons, is enough for someone to begin realizing, oh, wait, those things that used to really irritate me, I now understand. So, for example, eye contact. The direct eye contact, which is preferable in Western societies, is aggressive in Zulu society, at least, and a lot of other African societies. So, knowing that, what difference does it make? It means that the person reacts more favorably. There's less dissonance between the Western cultural approach and an African cultural approach. Instead, there's a kind of a harmony that's created, even if it's conducted in English. But if it's conducted in a vernacular language, in isiZulu or Sesotho or Chitewa or whichever language, that makes a huge difference.
So in my experience of I think we're on lesson 10,
yeah.
which is quite amazing. There's mixed responses that I get when I do try greet. Mostly people are also that thing, they giggle, they laugh, they laugh. Some people are not happy that I've greeted them. For some reason, they'll be like, hello, which is fine. And definitely getting the accent better and smiling and, try to make the connection and try hard. In the short time, I think within Omnicor, it's shifted something. And people speak about diversity and they speak about, understanding each other better. But I think that your lessons, bringing in the sociology and the culture, has definitely impacted the culture for us.
It's interesting to hear, because I see the effect that the lessons have on sort of individual clients. And it's nice to see that it works in a group, because I think it's the first time that I'm trying it in this kind of setting, because it could quite easily just become an abstraction from work. But because it's a language which is actually happening in the work environment and in the daily life of people who are part of it, it means that there's a connection that's being created, which will change issues that might exist into non-issues. Also, I think speaking that other language is not just about knowing the words, it's about taking the right steps, understanding the culture, and that deep look at different aspects of culture that we've been doing enables the organizational culture to shift too, because it's saying, hey, here's another approach to this. Here's maybe just consider this when you're thinking about this person or this group. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a big commitment. I think anyone who's in that group is, committing to learn a language. It's not just I'm coming for a one-day workshop. From there, we're all going to play nice. There is a much more, like from a personal point of view.
I think in terms of diversity, that's an interesting thing to think about, because I recently taught someone who had gone through, you see, I make it sound like it's a treatment, had gone through diversity training in their workplace. And she was one of 3 white-skinned people, and they were in a staff complement of, I think, 60. And it was in a charged environment, and there was a lot of emotion. And she said she didn't understand how they could call it diversity training when there were two people in the group who couldn't understand what was going on most of the time. She could, because she'd been in my lessons. I think that sometimes the direct approach creates a violent response. Now, this is an underlying philosophy of mine. I think that, yes, there's value in saying, in order to fix diversity issues, we need to talk about diversity. We need to all sit in a room and say, okay, what is racism? Are you being racist when you say this? Yes, you are. What is sexism? What is, etc.? Okay. Now, that's a direct approach, and a lot of people favor that. But actually, having a lesson a week may seem like it's a small thing, but there's that commitment, and people are actively changing the way that they interact with other people. Now, and those other I mean with a big O. Okay, so it's people who previously had been a closed book to them. Now, that closed book is because of various reasons, but it doesn't matter. The point is that just making the effort, just taking the step towards that other means that you're actually working on diversity. You're no longer just sitting behind your big wall, sitting in your bubble, and saying, why is this person so, why do they get angry? I don't understand why they get angry. I don't understand why they took that comment I said so badly. So I'm just going to hide away and get my work done and not bother.
I mean, I think that's been a massive learning, just how the nuances in the language, and you can just get one little thing right in the tone, and this attributes so much for someone, and I was completely unaware around the impact that language could have like that.
Well, I think it's like the example you gave, that when you talk to the housekeeper when you go give the lesson there, straight away the barriers that exist between you kind of fall away. And there's something very colonial around the idea that I can just talk English and expect everybody to answer me in English, whether I'm at a petrol attendant or in a shop or whatever it is. And there's some power hierarchy there that's imposed on that situation. So I have a real understanding of that you can level those barriers between people. You can diminish the barriers just by making the effort. So my sense is that if everybody spent a half an hour just learning the greetings off by heart, that would change South Africa. You know what I mean? That is something as simple as that, because that sending, it's not just that I can do the greeting, I'm sending a message that I'm making an effort to value who you are as a human and your culture, and I'm doing something that meets us halfway. So I can't have maybe a long conversation about our lives and that, but I can just break down that initial barrier. Is my sense of that correct, or is that like an over optimistic view of?
That's absolutely right. I think what came to my mind when you were speaking is that I'll give you an example. Okay, two different interactions where all I did was greet. That was the only difference between these two interactions. They both occur at the most beloved of all government departments, Home Affairs. Okay, so the first interaction, I go to Home Affairs and I'm with my wife, and she's still learning. So because just for her comfort's sake, I switched to English, and we're doing the interaction in English. And the response is kind of bored to negative. Okay, like, oh, here's another Mlungu. He's just going to go ahead with English. Okay, well, why do I need to bend over backwards? Why do I need to help this person? Second time, this time I'm more stressed. There's for various reasons, you can imagine. And I'm not with my wife. And so I'm totally in vernac mode, and I just do all the things. I greet, I ask about health, okay, I ask about everything else, I ask politely where I can go to, And suddenly the queue diminishes. Suddenly I'm sent to this counter around the side. Suddenly the person helps me, gets my stuff done with minimum of fuss. No problem. Now, that's me, admittedly, okay? But go with just simple greetings. If you greet someone at a till, at a checkout, in isiZulu, I've found here in Joburg, on a good day, it's 9 out of 10 times the person's going to respond. They're going to smile straight away. They're going to laugh, which is just smiling loudly, Colleen. So it's a good thing. Okay, so the same verb in Zulu, okay, means to smile and to laugh. So they smile. The barrier is lower. Also, the equaling. Now, this is what troubles most Western people, or people who speak isiLungu, okay, one of the European languages, is that stepping into that space opens you up to make a mistake. Now, okay, so which we am I talking about? So white English speakers particularly are quite precious about, that person didn't pronounce that word correctly, and then make a judgment usually about education level, about class, about race, about other languages. And it's quite cruel, actually.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes a bit of a refreshing wake-up call to be in an interaction with someone and mess it up. And think, and after that, a moment of feeling really maybe frustrated or embarrassed even, I hope that people get to the point where they say, but this is what people go through on a daily basis in white languages.
Right.
It's a humbling moment. And that humility, I think, is the most important way to approach in South African society and its diversity issues, I think. So it does, because that immediately levels.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Well, I think you make yourself vulnerable when you put yourself out there and you're speaking in a language that you don't know, and you don't know how people are going to take it. Often people with me, they start to teach me other words, and they're actually very generous, and they say you're doing well. So I have many messages for my teacher. Tell your teacher she's doing very well. Okay.
Nice.
So Cullen, you are currently writing a science fiction novel in Zulu.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that and how you come to be the first person.
So this actually refers to what you said right at the beginning, Hilton. There is an attraction in me, not just to the writing aspect or to the writing in Zulu aspect, but to the futurism as a way of looking into a future where Africa will be prominent. I do not see any need to extol the virtues of Western societies that have actually ended up doing more harm than good, right? And all the sci-fi that everyone reads is about Western cultures or Asian cultures succeeding. But where is the future for this continent? I think that there is a fundamental link between the type of literature that is written and the way that a culture responds to innovation and change and newness. And I think that I found that cultures that developed fantasy literature and sci-fi were able to access an imaginative space which opened up new conceptual pathways and understandings for them. So that's a long way and a very academic way of talking about it. I think it's really cool to be able to write something which has never been written before. I came to do this because I am actually a storyteller. One of the things I inherited from my dad. And isiZulu is oral, and my stories are very much, they're meant to be heard, but writing them is an interesting discipline for me because then I have to actually put it down and sort of figure it out there, whereas usually I'm much more responsive to what's going on around me. I wrote a fantasy short story and a sci-fi short story for a competition last year. And this competition was run by a brand new publisher, and their goal is to publish speculative fiction in isiZulu with the same rationale that I just gave earlier, that very academic thing. And the fantasy story was published, just selected. So, and it was the very first publication of Zulu fantasy or speculative fiction that had ever occurred. So that was cool. And I thought, oh, well, they didn't really like the sci-fi one. Oh, well, back to the drawing board. And then in January, they contacted me and said, no, actually, we really did. We'd like you to make it into a novel. Wow. Which was terrifying. I won't lie, that was terrifying. I find it deeply amusing in my better moments that the very first thing I'm going to write that's going to be published is going to be in isiZulu and not in English, whereas I have a degree in English and Latin, not in Zulu, which is this is another conversation we could have about formal versus informal qualification. But that has been this, because it's not finished yet. The process of writing a novel in isiZulu has been amazing. I had no expectations. I did not know what it was going to be like. But I realized early on that I made certain commitments, and this feeds into the understanding of the language. The whole novel is essentially about language in one way or another. But I made a commitment to not using words borrowed from English, to use only indigenous isiZulu vocabulary as much as possible. And believe it or not, there are isiZulu words for things like a nebula or a spiral galaxy or a neutron star. So those are really cool. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. The only word that I couldn't find a Zulu equivalent for, which is funny, and you'll probably know this word because of recent history in politics, is umshini, which is a machine. There's no Zulu word for it. So that's the only one that comes in. So I talk about, it's an interesting process. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm interested in just getting into the sociology. So when I was teaching, we spoke a lot about the kind of work of Harry Triandus and the individualism, socialism, individualism, collectivism. And do those constructs still apply? I mean, do you see them in the different worlds in which you exist? Do you see more of a hybridization as black people become more westernized, that there's taking on some more individualistic characteristics? What's your experience being someone who's a kind of bridge between the worlds?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. You're getting me back into my academic space. Thank you, Hilton. Okay, so I ventured off into creative space and you got me back. Okay, so I think it's a spectrum. I think that depending on degrees of urbanization and education levels and exposure to Western culture, there is a spectrum. So you might get someone up here in Joburg who has completely adopted an individualist approach to the point where they, in Zulu, would be described by, there's a specific verb for them. Yeah. Babungugile. So bunguga is to become detribalized. To become totally westernized and give up on cultural ways.
So that's not a compliment.
No, that's a negative thing. Okay, but it does happen. So I think that I've found in the various worlds that I'm in that for the most part the collective is still, or the collectivist understanding is still predominant, because that was my understanding of what you were talking about, is that the African, if we want to really generalize a lot, an African approach is more collectivist than individualist. Right. Yeah. Okay. You do get the sort of the big men and the big women who pop up amongst, and that's an interesting thing to think about as well. I think that the people with whom I interact at, let's say, Pick and Pay, they are still much more collectivist, much more community-minded, not so much about the individual, and they would comment on people who were very westernized in a negative way. So if you're materialist in Zulu, a person will say, oh, uthanda, okay, you like things, and that's a negative thing. Right? So, I find that the clashing between the Western and African, and between the individualist and collectivist, between guilt and shame, that's an interesting thing to think about here, that has never really been addressed. The Western modes of thought that were brought here were kind of forced down people's throats. sometimes after military conquest,
Right.
and subjugation. So there's a reaction against it, and there are some people who are pushing for a return in some way to a previous way of being and against a Western materialist approach. But sadly, the leaders that are coming out are not actually portraying traditional African values either.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be, kleptocracy is not an African value.
Right.
It's not how it works.
Yes.
So there's some interesting dissonance there for me. I think that when I talk to my father about the work he does in northern KwaZulu, in Tlhabealingana, that community orientation is very strong. And when there's someone who comes in and is just out for themselves, that is counted very strongly.
Right.
That's not okay. You can't be selfish. You can't be someone who keeps things and doesn't give to anyone else. That's not the way.
It's not the worldview.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think so, yeah.
Thank you.
So, looking at education and the level of teaching that goes on, where are we going to be in 5 years with this situation?
I think that, so I can focus on what I know. I know that language teaching is in a bit of a crisis. I know that there are issues in foundation phase with teaching languages. And if I want to focus a bit more specifically, I think that if something isn't done right now with particularly IEB schools, where there's still quite a high proportion of non-Zulu speaking or non-South African indigenous language speaking students, those students are going to be lost to learning isiZulu. They're not going to learn an African language. They're going to take whatever out they possibly can get, because the teaching does not suit the complexity of the environment. That's the basic issue that I see, is that whichever scapegoat you want to use. So whether you want to say it's the policy statements, or whether you want to say it's the response of people like the IEB to those statements, doesn't matter. Essentially, we're living in cloud cuckoo land, thinking that there really is a first additional language that works for everybody in Gauteng. So I'm not going to name names, okay, but there is a school, where the matric class this year has 2 white students in taking isiZulu. The rest of the class are African language speakers already. Some of them even speak isiZulu at home. That's home language. And yet they are required to do exactly the same syllabus. They're required to have the same teaching methodologies. They are lost. They do not know what is going on. And those are the ones that stuck with it past grade 9. Because what happens in grade 9? Suddenly, you mean I can still choose Afrikaans? Okay, I'm going to do Afrikaans because it's easier. There is not a single person who would deny that it's easier to do Afrikaans than it is to do Zulu, especially if you speak English, because it's just a step and then you're there. Great. Zulu is an alien language to English speakers. It's totally different. So unless something is done to change the way it's taught, and unless some acknowledgement is made of the fact that there are in fact 3 different groups in that class, there are people who speak isiNguni, so they speak isiXhosa, isiZulu, isiNdebele, or Siswati, which means that they can all understand each other. Cool. Then there are people who speak Sesotho, or Setswana, or Sepedi, or another African language, who are at an advantage over the last group, which is pale-skinned South Africans and people originally of Indian extraction. Okay, so they are at a dead loss in those classes. It's not going to help. There is a government response, the incremental introduction of African languages, which is a bill that's currently on the cards. It's trying to address this issue by saying that children have to be exposed to at least 3 languages in primary school. And those 3 languages have to include at least 2 African languages by which they are defining out Afrikaans, which is a bit of a struggle for me, because I look at the Northern Cape and I think, hang on, for these kids, that's their language. Unless you bring in Nama, you're not going to address their language needs. So the policy sometimes seems a bit like a one-size-fits-all, and that doesn't work. I find again and again, especially with language, one size fits all is the worst approach. You have to contextualize. I have to actually be in the class, seeing how you're reacting to a word or how you're reacting to a word, and actually
see the terror on my face.
Yes, I see the terror on your face. And no, okay, let me try and link it to something you already know. But that's in 5 years from now. I mean, I don't know how many white students there will be left in the classrooms, to be honest. Okay, maybe that's the change that needs to happen. But I think that there needs to be more of an effort made to make the system more interesting to children and less oppressive. There needs to be an acknowledgement that thinking is not linear, thinking is not regurgitation, that it's actually the creativity needs to come into it. And unfortunately, in my experience, I mean, I'll give you a very personal example. Last week, my son comes home and he says, almost in tears, I hate Zulu. And I'm like, why do you hate Zulu? He says, it's so boring in the class. And the teacher just makes us sit down and do our work. And it's just, I just don't like it anymore. Now, luckily he has me, so I can teach him at home. That's great. But to any of the other kids in the class, what's it like for them? That's not okay. Something needs to change.
And I think when you're lost, then you just get overwhelmed and you just exit. So you stop learning.
People talk about
like
maths damage. You see, now that's the thing. People talk about it. I'm maths damaged. I acknowledge this.
Right.
And I know that that's a struggle for me. So whenever I do statistics or any of the other things that I do at the moment, it freaks me out. But I don't want my child to be language damaged. Because it's not just about Zulu. I had a negative experience once learning Afrikaans. But for some reason, I was resilient enough to bounce back, and I still love the language. So that's cool. But language damage is what happens when people get to the age of the adults in my classes, because suddenly they're like, yeah, but I can't learn languages.
I mean, maybe that's actually a good segue into my question about adult learning and languages. I mean, you've worked with adults and children. Is there hope for middle-aged adults, white middle-aged South Africans, to get to a passable level of conversational Zulu? And maybe also just, like, what are the baby steps? You know, what are the resources? Where do you go? What do you do?
Okay, awesome. So that's a big question. The first thing to say is that, yes, there is hope. I think that the thing that an adult learner has to be most aware of is that it is never going to stop. You are never going to reach a point where you can put the book down and say, okay, I've learned.
It's like golf.
It's like golf, yeah, exactly. And think about how much time you devote to golf, right? So, or whatever other hobby you have. Now, you don't have to be like me. I mean, when I learn a language, I go out and get every single dictionary I can find. I find all the online resources. I access them. I download them. I make flashcards. I learn. But those are useful steps. So you don't have to go full crazy like me. You can do it slowly, slowly. The first step is to work with your own learning style. So I don't know how you feel about this concept, but if you're more auditory, than visual, then you should be listening to the radio. You should listen to music. There has to be an unconscious element to this. And it's what we were talking about before the podcast, that small children, this is what I say to people, you may be a middle-aged white South African, but you have to remember how you learned language for the first time. You listened for the first year and made your noises which sounded nothing like the language. Then you attempted to speak it and got everything wrong and some things right and fumbled and stumbled the way you were walking, the same sort of thing, right? Eventually, you were able to make conversation, talk. But it's that humility at the beginning. And you can see it. I can see it in my own children. My daughter learns through reading written things, whereas my son, who is a twin brother, learns through hearing things and saying them. So for you, I think, figure out which works for you. And the basic thing is to set yourself goals that are manageable. I still do this for myself. So I still say to myself, okay, I'm going to learn, or I'm going to read up on 5 new proverbs this week, and I'm going to practice them in speech. So I do. My colleagues think I'm crazy, but it works, okay? So I find appropriate ways to use the proverbs, okay? So I try not to pick too many random ones. But for you, it would be a case of saying, okay, I'm going to learn 5 words, and I'm going to practice them either by myself in the car or sitting at my desk. I've got 5 minutes, take out flashcards, I try them out. You can play that, so you've got the English on one side, Zulu on the other, and just do that. The nice thing is that to get to a conversational level, there is a number of things you need to learn in Zulu. So essentially, there are only 200 verbs you have to know, just 200. It's not too many. English speakers, if you haven't actually, if anyone who speaks English has never stepped into the shoes of someone learning English, you'll be surprised at how many you have to learn there. So 200 verbs. You probably need another 200 nouns, and that's the bulk of it. Other than that, there's some descriptive words. There are only 15 adjectives. It's great. And you can maybe learn another 10 descriptive words, and then you can actually have a manageable data set for your brain to work with. Okay, so the vocab learning is a nice measurable objective, and the other one is phrases. So you have to set yourself moments when you step over that boundary. You step into the space where you're humble, the space where you're maybe willing to make mistakes, and practice. Find someone. Colleen, you were talking about a human resource. So this answers your question, Hilton, that the people around you are the ones who will teach you the most in any African vernacular language. I have learned more from cleaning staff and security guards than I ever did from books. And sometimes that means carrying a little book around with you, and as you talk to someone, say, write this down. Okay. I want to look this word up later. So this is answering the second part of your question. Where do you look it up? There are some fantastic free online resources. There's isiZulu.net, which is wonderful because it's a collaborative project. They've been working on it for a long time. And it enables you to even put in a whole sentence and it'll break it up and tell you what's happening. So it's a learning tool. Oxford has an online isiZulu dictionary as well, which is quite useful. Please don't use Google Translate. This is the cry of all translators everywhere. Please just don't. Okay, don't. Until someone has actually sat down and worked with their algorithms a little bit better, it's just not working at the moment. You can also, there's a little dictionary you can get, which is the Nyembezi dictionary. It's a translator's dictionary, so there's not much context. It's just word for word, and you might trip up there. Then, so I'm now moving up the scale. So the translator's dictionary. Then you have Vilakazi and Doak, which is a tome. It's a really, really thick book, but it's incredibly detailed. You can look stuff up in English or in Zulu. You can find out exactly where the word comes from. It's a bit like the shorter Oxford. Don't know if you...
Yes, of course.
The shorter, it's a misnomer. And once you've crossed that threshold, so once you've learnt enough Zulu and you've found your way through the dictionary, then you can, there's some amazing Zulu lexica out there. So Mbata's isiXazamazwi is fantastic. Nyembezi's isiXazamazwi is also good, but those are Zulu.
Right.
So that's advanced level.
Okay.
For now, those resources are very useful.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm just sitting here thinking, what would your father say about your involvement in Zulu and where you come and where you play?
He loves it. We chat about it often. He said to me recently that he loves the fact that I've taken his way of being and now tried to, or am actually, there's no trying, and am now bringing it to other people and enabling them to see that way of being. That's really powerful for me. It's also incredibly powerful to be able to introduce people to the language through that very physical, very sort of emotional connection to him. Because it's not, I mean, I've taught lots of languages. Obviously, I have a deep connection to English because it's my other language. But teaching Latin and Greek is an abstract process. Even when teaching poetry or teaching drama, it's still abstract. But the emotional connection that I feel to isiZulu, I think he does say that it's incredibly powerful. It changes the way that I interact with people and what I'm doing in terms of teaching and translating and writing. He just said, you've gone one step further than I thought was possible. So that's quite humbling for me. I think that's amazing. Yeah.
So I think just, heading into our lesson this afternoon, our experience at Omnicor has been the lessons fly because we're enjoying it, we're having fun, lots of laughter, and we've really learnt a lot in the 10 sessions. And also think because leadership is involved, so Hilton is participating, there's a sense of real buy-in, of authenticity. This is not just a tick box. I don't know, Hilton, from your side, if you wanted to add anything for an Omnicor project.
I mean, I think it's just useful maybe for the listeners who don't know to kind of describe the model. So what we decided as a corporate was, let's try to do our bit in breaking down the barriers. And we work with people across the kind of racial spectrum. And I've always been envious of people who can speak a black language. That's something I wanted to do. My doctoral thesis was around traditional healing, and I really took a strong interest in the culture. And so our model was, well, let's put this out to the business, and let's see, we're going to offer a lesson once a week for an hour, and let's see who wants to come. And I think in no time at all, the lesson was full. We had our maximum number of people, and we've been going now with Cullen for close to 3 months, somewhere around there. And for me, who's been always, struggled to grasp languages, I taught in Afrikaans University for 10 years, and I still cannot speak Afrikaans. And it's been a very humbling experience. I mean, I think isiZulu is very hard. It's I think learning a language as an adult is hard. I mean, I can't think of, maybe a better way to do it would be kind of like a child does, where, you immerse yourself in the language. There's no other option. Go into the heart of KZN and you've just got to make it work. And maybe that would be the kind of I
think Omnicor's going on a Zulu retreat.
Flooding version
Cullen,
of kind of doing that, where, it's like sink or swim. But I'm interested in your experience with our group, and is this a model for other corporates who want to take that baby step?
I would say so. I think that I do, by the way, I'm very keen on the immersion model. I think that with enough preparation, it really does work. So having done that with other languages where I do a lot of work beforehand and then go and spend time in situ and then you just learn.
Yes.
I think that this model works. And there's a very interesting dynamic which you couldn't have planned, which just happens. Having people at different levels within the organization, and also having different gender, having different race, having different languages as background. That for me, I don't know if you remember the very first lesson I asked about those diversity questions, essentially.
Yes.
I think that it is a model which works because there is a core of people who, at the very least, interact with each other differently.
Right.
Because it's also an activity which is not directly work-related. Now, this is interesting. So, like I was talking earlier about the oblique approach, there's a kind of a different relationship that develops between those members of the group. I think that for other corporates, I might work a bit more strongly with things like boundary agreements, understandings of how this is going to work. But I sort of took a giant leap into this organization, and I'm loving it because I didn't have to do all of that groundwork. That was nice. I think it would work. I joke about this with various people. I say I'd like to just clone myself and then distribute. Because you need, I think it's necessary for there to be someone who is energetic, enthusiastic, interested, which I think I am. And that makes a difference. Because I've seen corporate language projects fail dismally just because the person doing the training, if you call it that, because I don't think of it as training,
Right.
Just makes it too dry. And I think that's where the problem comes in. But yeah, I think it's a necessity for a lot of places. I'm thinking, I look at toxic environments and people are talking about toxic masculinity, but I think actually there's a toxicity that comes when people, where the boundaries between them are too high, where there is no communication across cultural or racial lines. So I think it's a necessity. I don't know how it will happen though.
Yeah, I think there's a case to make it part of the BE contract, that like this is not just about leveling the playing fields with employment. It's around meeting each other as individuals in a different space. I think it's been a very an eye-opening experience for us. I'd recommend it to other companies, although I personally feel like a failure in it.
You are not. There are no failures.
Maybe just to wrap up, you do some interesting work around translations and surveys, which I think is a bit of a fit to what Omnicor does. And
Sure.
maybe just a bit of an understanding of how you found the impact when you were working with your survey questions.
So, as part of my day job, I develop instruments for use in measuring outcomes, indicators, those sorts of things in the development world. So I'm an M&E person, if you want to give me my proper nomiker. Now, the survey that I developed was for use in schools and for measuring school climate. Now, that in itself is a daunting thing, because what are you talking about? We're talking about presence, absence of corporal punishment. We're talking about bullying, harassment, abuse, neglect, all of those sorts of stuff, fear, everything else. So it could potentially have been a 300-item questionnaire, or, which would have just been unwieldy. So I reduced it to some key items, and it worked out at 25. And it was all in English, and I had it all ready. And then I thought, no, but we need to translate this. How am I possibly going to translate it into all the languages that exist in the schools? Now, this is an interesting thing, because I've heard usually older white people who only speak one language, said, not disparagingly at all, say that there's no way we can possibly solve the language question in the schools because there are just too many languages. Now, that's just, no. Okay, so I said, right, what are we going to do to cope with this? Because now we've printed these surveys. They're all in English. They're asking really deep questions of children in grade 6 and 7. And we've got informed consent and all the rest of it, but it's all in English. How are we going to change this dynamic? Because otherwise we're going to get the same rubbish answers we got before when we asked in English. And those were with teachers. So I said, right, get all the regional managers together. How many vernaculars do we have in the room? Okay, so we've got Sesotho. Yes, we've actually got 3 people who speak Sesotho. Awesome. Do we have isiXhosa? Yes, we've got isiXhosa. isiZulu? Yes, we've got me. Do we have Tshivenda? Yes, someone speaks Tshivenda. Fantastic. Someone speaks a bit of Xitsonga. Afrikaans? Yeah, okay, there's Meneer Jones in Noord-Kaap, okay, and he can do that. And there were some gaps, but we said, okay, what do we do if you get to a school and you can't translate it? Because this is the choice we made. We said the instrument would still be in English, because we're not going to anticipate how many languages are going to be present in the class, because that's going to be, well, now I could do it because I have the data, but essentially the person's going to come in, they're going to do an assessment of the languages in the class, which is we do as a sort of warm-up activity, because it's the very first question on the survey. We say, okay, so Nikuluma Zepizilimi, what languages do you speak? This was all wonderful in practice, because then in theory, because then you would say, okay, well, I'll translate it, each item, and we'll work with that. Okay. Some regional managers couldn't do it. Some had to ask the teacher for help, but it did immediately change the dynamic, because it's the white coat syndrome was absent, because now the kids are laughing about some of the items. They're like, oh yeah, because now it's in vernacular. It's not in English. It's not in a formal language. It's in actually a localized personally localized language. And in the Eastern Cape, where I actually went and did this, I found that I was code switching between 3 different languages, and the kids gave more honest answers. They knew what they were talking about. And this was in response to a problem I'd had, a challenge I'd had to the data, which came from one of the schools that said, "Oh man, these kids don't understand the questions that are being asked. They don't understand what another learner made me do something wrong I didn't want to do means." So I said, "Oh, okay, I'll test this." So I tested it in Uitenhage. Okay, Etinacha. And there, the kids understood exactly what that meant. There was no issue. They totally understood, because I came back and I did mapping exercises with them, and they understood exactly what was meant, and they said, "Yeah, it does occur 67% of the time here, because here, in this part of the school." And it's opened up a discussion, because now I can go to the principal and say, "Hey, your kids are complaining that this is happening in their school at this point during break. Do you have a teacher on duty there?" "Oh, you don't? I think you should do that." Because, that's what you need to do. Child safeguarding is a thing, right? So the language, again, breaks down barriers. I arrive in a school and I'm a white guy, but I talk with the principal, and suddenly everything relaxes. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that sounds fascinating. Well, thanks, Cullen. We've run out of time, and we have a strict Zulu teacher, so we can't be late.
Yes.
And it was really wonderful to get to hear a little bit more about your life and your relationship with Zulu.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Cullen. It's been great. Hopefully we'll do it again.
I look forward to it.
Okay. Great.
Omnicor has had a total of 15 lessons with Cullen, and we are well on our way to building both our vocab and cultural understanding of the isiZulu nation. With Heritage Day approaching on the 24th of September, this episode is an inside peek at how the team at Omnicor has made cultural diversity part of the weekly training schedule. We all agree this has not been easy, but transformational. If you like this episode, please subscribe and comment, and check out our website www.omnicor.co.za for our blog and previous podcast episodes. A big thank you to William Uren, our producer.